30 seconds, please, Dave. Good evening and welcome to the March 9th, 2021 Prior Lake Spring Lake Watershed Board of Managers meetings. Our first order of business, please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. So our next order of business, we have the swearing in of a new manager who's been reappointed. Kurt, I think you're going to take over, sir.
It's been 3 years, and time flies when you're having fun, I guess. But Manager Miser has been reappointed for another 3-year term, so we have to do the oath of office. So, Manager Miser, if you would stand, please. And repeat after me. I, Mike Miser.
I, Mike Miser.
Do solemnly swear.
Do solemnly swear.
That I will support the Constitution of the United States.
That I will support the Constitution of the United States.
And of the state of Minnesota.
And of the state of Minnesota.
And will faithfully discharge the duties.
And will faithfully discharge the duties.
Of the office of manager.
Of the office of manager.
Of the Prior Lake Spring Lake Watershed District.
Of the Prior Lake Spring Lake Watershed District.
To the best of my judgment.
To the best of my judgment.
Congratulations, Mike.
And ability.
And ability.
Thank you, sir.
Yep.
Now I can make the big bucks. Okay, thank you, Kurt. All right, our next item on the agenda is the public comment period. This is typically for anybody watching at home. If there's anybody, this is where we invite you to come share with us if there are things we're doing right, we're doing wrong, something that you'd like to see us do better, that we'd invite you to come down and speak with us. I know there's nobody here from the public this evening, so we're going to move on, but please feel free to come down and say hello if you'd like. Next item on the agenda is to approve the agenda. I would like to confirm if there are any changes to the agenda. First of all, Joni, any changes from the staff perspective?
No changes.
Seeing none for then the managers. Frank?
Just a point of clarification. Is item 4.3 an action item, or is that an information item? It just
I believe it's just an information item.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Anybody else, gents? Seeing none, then I would entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second on the floor. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
That motion carries. Thank you. So our first then under other old and new business. This one's very new. So we have number 4.1, the welcome of Joni Giese, our new district administrator. So Joni, are you prepared to introduce yourself?
I can say a few quick words.
Okay.
So once again, I'm Joni Giese, and I am really excited to be joining the Watershed District, and I'm really looking forward to working with you, the board, and our staff, along with also our implementation partners, and really wanting to looking forward to advancing the mission of the Watershed District. My background is I'm coming from consulting. I've been with a multidisciplinary consulting firm where I was a principal for the last 25 years. And in that role, also got some experience in working on water resource projects. And so I'm really excited, once again, to bring that water resource experience to the Watershed District.
And so we are. Thank you, Joni. I know that we are extremely excited. We were shouting from the rooftops at our last meeting about you and lauding some of your history and intelligence and capability. So again, welcome and thank you for glad karma put us together. Okay, next item on the agenda then, the programs and projects update.
Okay, I will be starting off the update here. All right. All right, there we go. Is that better? Thank you. Okay. As of today, the Prior Lake lake level is at 901.5, roughly about a foot below the natural discharge. With recent forecast predictions of about an inch of rain over the next week, we still do not have a concern about high water levels this spring, nor needing to discharge water for storage. We have turned on, with help from the city, the ferric chloride system, so we are pumping and dosing ferric chloride. Sampling is beginning this week. I'll begin on the carp management. I'll be talking about our seining event on Spring Lake, 2 gill netting operations on Upper Prior Lake, and I'll mention our tadpole barrier work. So on February 18th, we conducted a seine on the northwest portion of Spring Lake. We removed about 7,500 pounds, totaling a little over 1,200 individual carp. 13 total pit tags were recorded from these group of fish. 4 of those pit tags were originally implanted from the Geis Wetland. We had 1 active radio tag of the 4 that we kind of identified the aggregation from inside the net. And we also located 1 inactive, or like a dead battery radio tag. On Upper Prior Lake, on February 23rd, we removed 3,000 pounds using our gill nets from the gill net pilot project. And that was located somewhere around the Naughty Oar Marina. We used speakers to herd the fish towards the seine nets, or the gill nets. The gill nets are stationary, so once deployed, it involves a little more work to move fish if they're in an undesirable location. This last Friday, on March 5th, we located carp aggregating in Mud Bay, and we removed only about a little over 30 individual carp, totaling 345 pounds. We captured 4 game fish during this event, and our permit requirements make us hold on to these fish for 48 hours and monitor the conditions. Until Friday, we had not captured game fish, which was propelling this pilot project further, because the DNR was looking for additional data about, what type of condition the game fish might come out using gill nets. On Sunday, we released the fish alive and well, so good news. Further information regarding the carp program, we've began design work on the tadpole pond barrier. This barrier will block spawning size carp from entering. It'll prevent burrowing. It'll allow seasonal fish passage, and it meets our grant deliverables. So we're hoping to get this installed, or we're planning to get it installed before this year's spawn or migration.
All right, so I thought I'd provide just a quick update on the Sutton Lake Outlet Project. First off, I just wanted to thank the board members that were able to make it last week to our little mini tour. We had about a dozen partners and folks out there, and so it was just great to have everybody there, seeing the construction project and talking more about the details of the project. So it started construction last week. They had a pipe they had to reorder or recut, so then the construction is really quite more active this week. So they've been out installing the pipes and the outlet. Those poles that you see will stop cattails from clogging the outlets. They're also installing the final rock and doing the final grading this week. Hopefully by the end of this week, we're going to be all wrapped up on this project. They do have a subcontractor for the seeding and the stabilization, so the hydro mulching and stuff might come a little bit later, but they'll be putting some straw down, which you might see if you go out there later this week. But they're wrapping it up. The site looks pretty good. Yeah, and we're just kind of finishing up this project. We do intend on doing a press release, and we are going to invite the press out there one more time because they weren't able to make it to that tour. So hopefully we get some good publicity on this project as well, and we're just excited to get it completed.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Maggie. Go ahead.
Now, the iron enhanced sand filter for Sutton Lake, what's the timeline on that? Are we looking at this year, next year? Can you give me any information on that one?
Sure, Mr. Chair, Manager Hennis. So the feasibility study is going to be completed this year. We're still wrapping up the grant work plan on that. Once that's approved at the end of this month, then we'll be engaging an engineer to do the design on it. And then so that will have to be grant funded because it'll be pretty expensive. So it'll probably happen later next year because we'll need to secure the funding and make sure that the feasibility is done. Does that make sense?
With these, how many are there going to be? Is it going to be just one or a couple of them? Or because basically all you do is you dig a shallow hole, dump a bunch of sand in, and then put some iron filings mixed at the top, right? Is there anything more than that?
Mr. Chair, Managers, we need to secure the easement, so that takes some time. And then finding the grant funding and waiting for the work plan and the proposal to be approved and all that does take some time as well. So it's not just digging a hole and it's putting in the sand. It's a whole lot of background stuff that happens in order to make a project work. And so that'll take some time. But you're right. I mean, once we get the funding secured and we're ready to go, it'll be relatively quick to put in.
Now, I went out there today in anticipation of the meeting, and there was still a backhoe down by the dam, and then right by the road they were lifting a galvanized steel culvert, a pretty long one, which I imagine was going to be hauled back there. And was that culvert for the bypass, or was that to actually let water run through when it reached a certain height right at the dam?
Mr. Chair, Manager Hennis. So, gosh, I wish I had the project plans up. So the weir is completed. So that's like the multi-stage weir. And then there's like two different outlets, one with a gate structure. I think Carl could probably describe it more on how it all works. There's also a beaver leveler component to it as well. If you want to talk about it more, Carl, I can probably bring up the design if you want to take a quick look. Okay.
Well, I guess it's up to the board if they want the full rundown of the structures, but the one that you're talking about, Manager Hennis, is the downstream of the two outlet structures, the beaver levelers and the low flow structure itself go into the outlet pipes. So those are larger pipes at a lower, flatter slope. So that's kind of the downstream of the structures is what that piping was coming in for.
Carl, were you aware of Chad Sandy told us that the far end of the culvert that goes under County 10 is actually bent. It's actually bowed, and that may have been the reason why when we were out there that time, the velocity of the water seems so much more aggressive coming out of the pipe.
Correct. That existing culvert under the county road has a rather unique design in which the slope of the pipe actually changes. There's a joint, and it has a much steeper slope to make up some of that grade, but that causes higher velocities and an erosion issue at the outfall.
So that doesn't mean the culvert is failing, right?
Not to my knowledge. That's what's been shown in the plans that we have of record.
Okay, thank you.
So I had a question, if I might. Anybody else on Sutton, though, while Maggie is here? Right? Yeah, go ahead, Steve.
Maggie, this Sutton Lake project has the ability to reduce high water levels in our lakes to have an effect, not a complete cure. How long has the planning and development and completion of this project? I know staff has put in a lot of really great work on it.
Mr. Chair, Manager Pawnee, so this has been a long time in the coming. This is back from the 2016 flood study. It was identified as one of the top storage sites for that project. And so we've been working on it ever since. Diane was fortunate enough to find some flood damage reduction money from the DNR, but this was definitely a lot of planning, a lot of talking with landowners, a lot of great work by EOR, a long time coming.
All right, thank you.
So I don't know then if my question would be for Jeff or for you, Maggie. I mean, typically you've led the CARP stuff, but I know Jeff has started to do that. But what I got thinking about here is I know we've had a bunch of smaller than seines. What are the total number of pounds that we've removed this year from all of the different seines? Do you know? And even ballpark's fine. It didn't have to be exact.
Mr. Chair, so you're just talking 2021 or
I'm
2020?
sorry. Let's say this winter season, yes.
This
The winter season, yes. So I guess 2021.
So since the turn of the year, it's 7,500 from Spring Lake, and then, well. 3,000 Upper Prairie.
So
Yeah, have we,
I thought there was. That's what I
is
thought.
that
there
with
was
the gill netting? So 5,000 from Upper Prairie?
So that's 12,000 plus
Yep.
the new ones that we just got reported.
5,000
other-
is including the gill netting.
Oh, that's
so-
the total. So about 12,000. So that's pretty good. So the reason I get thinking about it is knowing that, we used to go after the really big ones and they would only occasionally happen, right? And so our effort in trying to go find some alternative strategies that you're working on, really, we just encouraged and supported the effort, of course. But I think this is great. I mean, it's not the big one that we'd all like to see, but this is a good dent, in the population. So I think it's great to see that, and I know you continue to learn from it. So kudos and keep it up. Look forward to it. Great to see. Anybody else seeing nothing? Then we'll move on to the next item on the agenda, the Aquatic Vegetation Survey. Steve, welcome back, sir. I think you remember how this all works, right? Where the mic is, you got to hit the button. Please introduce yourself for the folks at home.
Great. Well, thank you again for the opportunity to present. My name is Steve McComas. I'm an aquatic scientist with Blue Water Science in St. Paul, Minnesota. And we've been on the lakes for a while, and I was just going to give a summary of the aquatic plant work that we were involved with for Fish Lake, Spring Lake, and the Prior Lakes. So with that, here are the locations down on Fish, Spring, and Upper and Lower Prior. We'll start out with curly leaf management for 2020. In Spring and in Prior Lake, both Upper and Lower Prior, kind of the plan of attack is you look at the areas that you're going to treat. So you delineate areas first, and then you make the decision, do you treat these areas or not treat them? And then when we set up some treatment areas, after the herbicide treatment, we'll go out and assess and see what the results were of that treatment. For Fish Lake this year, we did not do a treatment, so we went right to the assessment. The question was, how bad is curly leaf in Fish Lake, even without treatment? So here's the kind of the challenge. When we're out there early in the season, we want to delineate curly leaf, before it reaches its peak biomass and before the temperatures hit 60 degrees. So we're tracking curlyleaf before it's really it's in full growth, so to speak. So you can see a situation like this, underwater view, how do you delineate what's going to be potential nuisance growth in another month? And what we do is we look at stems, curlyleaf stems. And if it's more than 6 or 7 stems per rake sample, that's probably, our experience is, that's going to represent heavy growth in another month. So that's kind of our rule of thumb. So we go around, the map on the left for Spring Lake, we do this, what's called, a meander pattern, a zigzag pattern around the entire lake. And then we put the rake sampler down, and then based on the results of all these rake samples, we will circle up some areas to treat. And on the left-hand side there, on April 30th, we found about 15 acres in Spring Lake that looked like they're going to have the potential for heavy growth. And so those were circled up for treatment. Treatment occurred in May, and then we went in June, which is kind of the peak growing time for curlyleaf, to check and make an assessment of how good was that herbicide treatment. Now, on June 11th, especially in site numbers 1 and 2, those red dots represent still some pretty significant growth. So it looks like the treatment this year using diquat was probably not as successful as it has been in other lakes and in other years. Here's a blow-up of the treatment areas. Again, the red dots indicate some pretty heavy growth, and there wasn't much curlyleaf outside of our delineated areas, but within those treatment polygons, sites 1 and 2 did not have very good control. Site 4 had pretty good control. The green dots there represent light growth. And site 3, area 3, had some mixed results. So the question will be for next year, was this just a blip? Was this just, diquat, when we're using diquat, if there's a lot of turbidity in the water or suspended particles, diquat is not very effective. Maybe on this treatment day, that was maybe the case, because diquat has been very effective in Prior Lake, for example, when we used that in Prior Lake.
So Steve, before you moved to that was the one question I had in reviewing that report. I was sort of curious about that because we also just did the alum treatment, which would have, has dramatically improved the quality of the water. So I was curious as to why this might not have been successful, or are you going to get that later?
No, that's a good point. We should probably address that right now. That site numbers 2 and 3 especially are pretty close to the inlet area. And even though we had an alum treatment, if we have some suspended particles or even some dissolved organics coming in, that can really counteract or almost neutralize the diquat herbicide. The other herbicides that we've used in the past are called, it's an endothol, it's an aquathol. That is not as susceptible to being inactivated with some turbidity. So I think timing was probably a factor here. The alum treatment, you're right, had cleared up the water, and we should have been in pretty good shape, but it might have been just timing, might have been a day or two of some high turbidity levels, and it's something for us to consider as we go forward in terms of diquat or aquathol or the day of the application especially. Now, in the past, we've had some pretty significant curlyleaf in Spring Lake. Here's a picture from 2000, and we have curlyleaf at the surface and blue-green algae on top, and that's kind of the whitish color there. And so that was kind of the impetus for saying, what can we do? So I'm kind of going over the quick history of some treatments. Starting in 2002, on the west side of the lake, that was a harvesting area, and on that kind of the mid-south end or mid-south area, that was a herbicide area. So for 4 years, we were kind of doing an experiment to see what might be more effective. It turns out after those 5 years, herbicides were cost-effective and seemed to do a little bit better job than harvesting. So then we're going to look at, well, let's use harvesting, or let's use herbicides into the future. There was a gap here, though, from 2007 to 2015, where there was no curlyleaf treatment needed. But starting in, we started really looking at 2014 to look at where are the areas of some heavy growth, and for the next 7 years, all treatment areas have been kind of circled up there and put on top of each other, and you can see it, there's a pretty consistent pattern in terms of where that curlyleaf and the heavy curlyleaf has been growing. Yeah, question?
How do you explain no curly pond treatment needed for 8 years, and now the last 6, we have to have it again? What changed?
That's a good point. The curlyleaf itself is well, there's a lot of factors, including climate. I mean, by climate, I mean snow cover, ice on, ice off, and snowpack, runoff, things like that. Also, our iron dosing I thought was a factor there for a number of years as well. Curlyleaf seems to be susceptible and won't grow or will be inhibited with high iron concentrations. And I think there for a number of years, we had some iron concentrations that might have been inhibiting curlyleaf growth. Whatever happened, starting in 2014, though, or 2015 is where we had some treatments, we've been pretty consistent in terms of these beds of where curlyleaf is showing up. Curlyleaf will grow in areas where the sediments, more or less, are conducive to growth. So if the sediment conditions are right, we'll get some curlyleaf growth. If we look at the rest of the lake, the north end and the east end, we have very little curlyleaf growth at any time. And we haven't really treated there since in the last 20 years. So there, conditions are probably not conducive to growth.
So Steve, let me follow up on Kurt's train of thought or that question, because in that corner where you thought that the higher turbidity of the water coming into Spring Lake, but that's also the area where we're getting the water from the ferric chloride plant. So
Yes, right.
help me understand why those two seem to be opposite things. One supportive, one inhibiting the growth of curlyleaf.
Well, I'm not sure how the ferric dosing stations have been operating over the last couple decades almost. Was there a change at all starting about 2013, 2014? Because we were supposed to be sedimenting out the ferric chloride, and I think sometimes, some years, we might not have got real good settling, we might have had some iron coming into the lake. And that might be a factor for those years where we had low curlyleaf growth.
Okay, Carl sounds
Yeah,
like
Carl.
he's got some thoughts.
Mr. Chair, I don't pretend to know the science between the iron and the curlyleaf correlation or not, but that would be about the time when the retrofit to the ferric chloride system and the bypass went in, somewhere around, what was that, 2014, 2015? And so all of a sudden there's,
More untreated water.
well, there's not water that's bypassing the desilt pond that has higher concentrations of iron in it. It's, ramped down, so to speak, because of the high flow bypass installation and the change of the location of the discharge point for the iron to be right at the desilt pond rather than at the Highway 13 wetland weir, with mixing and some of it going to the desilt pond and some of it not in high flow conditions. So I think before that retrofit, you had likely a little bit more iron reaching Spring Lake itself.
Gotcha. Okay.
That's interesting. Yeah, I didn't know that, and that would maybe explain that potential curlyleaf variation from a number of years. It got too efficient. The ferric chloride dosing station then became more efficient at settling out the iron as possibility. Well, if we look at iron dosing, and I'm sorry, I just looked at this chart today. I haven't added in iron for the last few years, but we've had pretty consistent iron dosing. And you can see where curlyleaf treatment kicked in was about 2016. For a couple years, even though we had some heavy curlyleaf growth, we didn't treat, but we did start treating in 2016, even though we were delineating some curlyleaf. So that's what that chart shows. In the Prior Lake, we do kind of the same thing in terms of that. We start out with a meandering survey, and we delineate areas that look like are going to produce heavy curlyleaf in a month, and we treat those. So this year in Prior Lake, it was a pretty heavy growth. We treated 24 acres, a lot of that coming in, especially in the Mud Bay up there, site number 4. So the treatment occurred in May, and we came back in June to look at the treatment results, and treatment results in Prior Lake were very good this year. We had very little curly-leaf growth after the treatment, and here's a little bit of a blow-up. Although what did happen is we had those red dots indicate on treated areas, we had some curly-leaf come in after our delineation, but it was spotty and not really extensive beds of curly-leaf. In Mud Bay, those brown dots indicate curly-leaf that's not viable. It was present, but not viable. So the treatment in Prior Lake this year was, I would say, fairly successful. The hotspot map for Prior Lake, using the last 7 years, again, there is some pretty consistent beds that show up year after year. You can kind of see where our treatment polygons have been. We put all 7 years on top of each other, and Mud Bay is consistent. Down in the southwest corner is a consistent bed, and up there in Lower Prior, we have a string of polygons as well. The treatment history varies. Some years it's reduced, some years it's a little bit heavier, but it is generally not exceeding 30 acres over the whole entire lake. So for Fish Lake, what we did is we haven't really had to treat in Fish Lake for a number of years, but the question is, what is curlyleaf doing? So we do go out and do an assessment. And in this case, we do a meander survey, and we look at curlyleaf around the lake. The green dots and yellow dots are light to moderate growth, and there was a couple of red dots indicating some patches of curlyleaf where it probably was hitting the surface. But again, those are not extensive beds, and really not a recreational nor an ecological problem. So without treatment in Fish Lake for curlyleaf, it looks like it was probably worked out just fine. Well, going on now to midsummer, we want to do extensive and very quantitative plant surveys. These are called point intercept surveys. We put a grid out over the lake and sample these grid points in a very systematic way. We did point intercept surveys for Fish, Spring, and the Prior Lakes. For Fish Lake, you can see the grid here. We sample those points, and what we found is that there was a fairly good distribution around the periphery or in the nearshore area of Fish Lake, but we're not getting much growth, much plant growth, past about 8 or 9 feet of water depth. And this is native plants here. The green dots are light growth. We had some nice, abundant spatterdock and water lily growth. That's what represents, or is represented by some of those red dots as well. The dominant plant in Fish Lake was coontail. And as kind of a summary, or kind of as an overview, we have done point intercepts in 2015 and in 2018, and then in 2020. The plant distribution seems to be fairly consistent. It's not decreasing, it's not really increasing, so it's pretty stable. You can see that we're getting growth around the nearshore area for the most part, and then once you get past about 150, 200 feet from shore, you drop off into water depths 10, 11, 12 feet, and we're just not getting plant growth in Fish Lake at those depths. For Spring Lake, I was excited to go out to Spring Lake, especially after the alum treatment, and there's been some fish removal, some carp removal work. Well, what's happening out in Spring Lake with the plants? And what we're finding is that the coverage on Spring Lake in 2020, if we look at all those dots, those are the areas that were, especially the colored dots are the areas with plants. A lot of light growth, a little bit of moderate growth, and then some heavy growth shown with those red dots. The dominant plant here was coontail, but water celery and a few other native plants were coming in and looking very, very healthy, so to speak. We found 14 different species of aquatic plants. That's the highest total we've found going back to 1948. So that is a positive sign. The seed bank has really kind of kicked in here. The seed bank has probably always been there, but conditions have been such that that type of growth has been inhibited. So once the water clears up, maybe the fish densities are down, especially carp, it allows some of these seeds that have maybe been sitting for decades to sprout and grow. So we had 14 different species, and so that's going in the right direction. If we look at previous point intercept surveys, going from 2015 to 2018, 2019, and 2020, we're also looking at plant coverage. And plant coverage has not increased too much from 2015, but it has increased since 2018. And also, if you look at the color dots, we're getting a little bit more abundance of growth of native plants. These are all native plants. And just as a side note, although there's curlyleaf in Spring Lake, we have not found any Eurasian water milfoil in Spring Lake. So these are all native plants, and the coverage is increasing slightly, and the abundance is increasing as well, and the species diversity is at an all-time high. Well, we have done the same type of a survey then for Upper and Lower Pryor. And here's native plant coverage. What's kind of nice in the Lower Pryor Lake, for example, is we're getting plants growing there to 19 feet water depth. In Upper Pryor, plants have been limited this year to about 10 feet, although that's also at an all-time high for plant growth in Upper Pryor. There is milfoil in the Pryor Lakes, and we it's fairly widespread, but I think the good news is that those green dots represent light densities. So Eurasian milfoil is present, but at light densities, it's almost similar to densities of the native plants. So it's not really a real problem. It was a number of years ago. It was a bigger problem. So that was milfoil. If we look at point intercept surveys that we've done from 2015, 2018, and 2020, the coverage of plants has increased since 2015, decreased since 2018. That decrease from 2018 to 2020 might be due to a degree that I think zebra mussels might be actually peaking. They have started to decline a little bit. They're not filtering as much water. Clarity, we found plants out to 19 feet, but in 2018, we found plants out to 20 feet. 20 feet in 2018, 19 feet in 2020 might have a factor on their distribution. But I was also interested in Upper Pryor and what's happening in Upper Pryor. If we look at that in a little bit more detail, 2015, 18, and 20, we had plants growing out to 6 feet, covering about 33 acres in Upper Pryor, 2015. It increased to 74 acres in 2018. And in 2020, we've had about as much plant coverage as we've had in a long time. And also plants growing out to 10 feet, which is an all-time high for Upper Pryor. So that seems to be responding to water clarity improvements. Well, in summary, CLP, that's curlyleaf pondweed growth, does vary from year to year depending on climatic conditions and other things, but the hotspot areas remain pretty consistent in terms of that's where we find curlyleaf, but with variation from year to year. Curlyleaf in Fish Lake is present, but generally light to moderate growth. The overall plant distribution in Fish Lake is fairly stable. Eurasian milfoil is certainly present in Pryor Lakes, a little bit widespread, but at light growth, and probably, for the most part, at non-nuisance conditions. I think there's some good news with Upper Pryor. The plant coverage is increasing, and in Spring Lake, we have a slight increase in plant distribution, but we also have an increase in plant abundance, which could be important for future for water quality and sustaining good water quality in the future. So with that, any questions?
Awesome. Thank you, Steve. Gents? Kurt?
Another benefit of the alum treatment, according to what I got from you, is that it clears the water, which lets the plants get more sunshine, which helps them grow, right?
That's right.
And then also, some of these weeds on page 13 of our board package. Now, coontail is considered a healthy plant, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Curly-leaf pondweed is not. But some of these I'm not aware of.
Okay.
Phrase pondweed, northern, water milfoil is flat stem, water stargrass. How about those?
Do you know what I should do? I should put those pictures in there, and I'm sorry they're not in there. I'll make a little atlas.
Yeah, could you?
Fortunately, I get to do some surveys this next year. I'll put together an atlas of plant pictures so we can ID them. Those fries and flat stem, those are pondweeds. Those are, the genus is Potamogeton. Those are good water quality.
Oh, they are.
indicators.
Okay.
And so that's a real positive there.
Okay.
Too. Water stargrass, Heterothera dubia, that's a high quality plant because its architecture is such that it doesn't grow to a dense conditions, dense stem densities, and it allows fish, so it's good fish habitat as well.
Okay, good. One more, Sago, S-A-G-O.
Yes.
Is that another healthy one?
Yes. Sago Pondweed is another Potamogeton. They changed the name lately to Stuckinia. But anyway, that is, not only is that good for fish, but it's a good for waterfall production and attraction. In fact, we're transplanting Sago Pondweed in some of these wildlife ponds to attract waterfall, dabbling ducks, because you can eat the tubers and you can also eat the seeds. And so that is a high quality plant as well.
So it's basically the curly-leaf pondweed that's the bad one.
Yes,
right?
for the
The
most
invasive
part,
one.
especially in some of our lakes. And Eurasian milfoil, where it's present in the Prior Lake, although that's a non-native species, it's acting almost like a native plant in terms of its density. It's not taking over. It's not topping out with these nuisance canopies, for example.
One more quick question. I see where the Fish Lake report is already complete. Why aren't the spring and upper and lower Prior reports complete? Or do you do them, or does our staff do them?
Oh, no. I do them, and that's 100% my fault.
Okay.
So I went to Texas last week, and I was hoping to get them done, and I was just that far away, so I submitted them as a draft, but what it needs is a couple I's and cross some T's, and then they're done.
Well, you do a good job, Steve. I've known you for 7 years, so I'm not trying to be critical. I was just wondering. Thank you.
That's my fault.
Thanks. Steve?
Steve, with the increasing number of native aquatic plants in Spring and Upper Prior Lake, will they crowd out curly-leaf pondweed and Eurasian milfoil like Lower Prior Lake has? Do the native aquatic plants win when they kind of are doing battle?
That's a good question. Unfortunately, curly-leaf doesn't seem to be impacted by native plants, primarily because it grows early. You know, it's sprouting, it's growing right now, and as soon as the ice goes off, it's going to take off, and it takes off before the native plants get going. So it has a real advantage to kind of outcompete the natives that way, and that's why curly-leaf can be so persistent for long term. But milfoil can be impacted by native plants. And also there's a battle out there for nutrients with milfoil and the native plants as well. And so a good, robust native plant community should help keep milfoil in the long term at light to moderate densities.
All right, thank you.
Frank?
Question from the audience. There are some companies that treat plants along the lakeshore for lakeshore owners.
Mm-hmm.
There's certain companies that do that. What do you think about landowners treating for lakeshore weeds, and what's kind of your recommendation on how they should approach the weeds on their lakeshore?
Well, I guess I would recommend that we minimize the amount of plants that we treat or remove. However, there are some restrictions out there. And so, for example, on a 100-foot lot, you can only treat 50 feet. You can only go 50 feet out. So 2,500 square feet on Spring Lake or the Prior Lakes, we can work with that. And plus, for recreational use and for, just use of the lake, that's pretty important. For swimming, getting boats in and out. So I think it's okay to treat small little parts of your lake shore, but at the same time, try to minimize that as much as you can. But that does add to the enjoyment of the lake and the use of the lake as well.
Top of your head, do you have certain chemicals that you recommend for if they were gonna treat on their own rather than hiring a company? Or do you guys cover your-
Well, you can't treat with chemicals unless you're a herbicide applicator permitted. You can use a product called Aquacide with a permit that you can apply yourself. And that Aquacide is a 2,4-D product, which means it's pretty much geared for Eurasian milfoil. It doesn't have as much impact on the native plants because they're all potamogetans, and that's a different animal. They're monocots. Eurasian milfoil is a dicot. So 2,4-D will have an impact on milfoil, and that's the Aquacide pellets, but it won't have much impact on the native plants. But you do need a permit to apply chemicals.
Good question, Jamie. You helped me. Go ahead, Frank, you're next.
Am I on or?
Yes.
Just a question. You may have addressed this along the way. What is a point intercept survey?
Good. Yes. I'm sorry I didn't go
It's
into.
all throughout here, but I don't know
Yep.
what that
I
means.
didn't go into more detail. A point intercept survey is based on it's an aquatic plant survey that we have modified from a terrestrial survey where they would set out a grid and they would go to every 10 meters or every 100 meters on this grid, they'd put down a pole, and that'd be your point. And whatever plants touch that pole, they would then identify them and mark them. So that was the terrestrial approach survey, point intercept survey. On a lake grid, what we've done is we have set up the same type of grid. On Spring Lake, it's a 50-meter spacing. So every 50 meters, we sample right there on that spot using GPS. And then we put down a rake. So it's not quite a pole or a point like they do in the terrestrial surveys. But we put down a rake, pull that rake up, and then we identify the plants there. And so it's a systematic and quantitative type survey that's repeatable. So we can go back theoretically 1 year, 5 years, 10 years, and see how the plants have changed because we're hitting the same points on this grid.
Thank you.
Thank you. So my first question, I had a couple of questions. Steve, do you like what you do?
You know what?
I'm kidding because it comes through the passion, the energy, and the knowledge that you have. It's awesome, Steve.
Well,
So,
thank you. It's still
it comes
fun.
through. It's refreshing too. It's nice. So Steve, I had two questions. I was curious as I got thinking about as you're talking about these issues over time, our curly leaf issue in particular, and it made me think about whether the strategies you're doing are supposedly maybe slowly reducing that seed bed at that point, and the growth of obviously new stuff drop in seed bed. Is that sort of the essence? You're shaking your head already. Is that sort of the plan that at some point these will get into a less problematic? Obviously you stay on top of them. I don't mean that it's ever going to stop because I doubt that would happen, but can you comment on that?
That's a great question. What happens is it's a little bit like agriculture in that we can reduce the weeds out in a field, but if we stop a herbicide use, that seed bank is there and the plants and the weeds will come back. In lakes, the curly-leaf pondweed can come back from seeds, although it's very rare, but it can, and it can also come back from these turions. So we treat it every year before it produces those turions, which is where their regrowth comes from, and we can reduce the density and the extent over time. However, because one turion, when it sprouts and puts up a stem, it also puts out a runner. And then you have 8 or 9 stems coming off that runner. And then each stem, if it's not treated, can put out 8 or 9 or 10 turions. So once we stop treating for curly leaf, we'll get a year or two of good low growth, but it can also then go exponential within a few years if the sediments are conducive to that type of growth.
But wouldn't that argue that we should always be doing curly leaf treatment in order to keep the seed bed, and without the language, but basically in essence to stop adding to the seed bed.
Yes, yeah, that would be certainly an approach.
Okay.
And I don't think that we're seeing much damage to the native plants because curlyleaf grows up early and we're treating it. In fact, we're by the DNR permit, we treat before water temperatures hit 60 degrees because that's when the native plants start coming in. This is a contact herbicide. Both diquat and endothol are contact herbicides, but they only affect plants that are actively growing. So the native plants shouldn't be actively growing when we're adding the herbicide for curlyleaf. So it's somewhat selective, even though it's a broad-based contact herbicide.
Gotcha, thanks. So then my only other question, just Steve, overall, I mean, how long have you been working for us?
You know, I started with Don Benson a number of years ago. That was probably in the 1990s.
So just a couple of years here in our
It's
community.
been a lot of fun to watch everything progress.
With a longer survey, are we doing better at changing the type of plants and getting the native species that we need and reducing it maybe over a longer period of time?
Yeah, I've been at this long enough now on the district lakes that some of my data are historical. So yes, in the long-term trend of things, Spring Lake and Upper Pryor have improved. Fish Lake, I think, has not improved dramatically. I don't think it's declined, but I think Fish Lake might have been a little bit better maybe 20, 30 years ago in terms of water quality. And the other lakes have been hanging in there with their ups and downs, but like there's a few jewels out there that are just consistently really tremendous natural resources.
Anything we should be doing different?
No, but I do think it's, in fact, what you're doing, which is probably a template for other watershed districts, is active management. The idea is that we have to keep at this. Sometimes it's annual. It's nice to get to passive management if we put some things into place where we can just walk away from. But a lot of these lakes that have been somewhat nutrient impacted, it's going to be active management, and that's exactly what you're doing.
Okay, thanks, Steve. Go ahead, Kurt.
One more question. Steve, how do our lakes stack up against other watershed lakes in Minnesota in terms of healthy plant quality and in terms of invasive plant numbers? Can you tell us?
Yes, because I'm probably on 40 or 50 lakes a year, or maybe sometimes more. And, you know, you have a number of natural environment lakes, some lakes without public accesses that are in tremendous shape, and by far better than many, if not most, other lakes in the 5-county area, maybe even the 7-county area. Spring Lake and Upper Pryor have been a challenge, and those are hypereutrophic systems. Nobody in the country has been able to use passive management to improve those types of lakes. It takes active management. And I think this watershed district, and I've been, you know, tracking things for a number of years, is doing as good a job, if not a better job than a high percentage of other watershed districts, not only in Minnesota, but around the country, because I'm always looking at, hey, what are they doing in Lake George in New York? What are they doing in Lake Tahoe in California and down in Texas and things like that? And we are as active and progressive as any watershed district around.
Thank you, Steve. Appreciate it. Thanks for coming down. Thanks for the report, sir. Okay, we are on to our Upper Watershed Blueprint, our update from Brian. Brian, I think you know the plan too, to introduce yourself, please. You know how this works here.
Is this on? Oh, there it is. Board of Managers, staff, thank you for having us in here to discuss the final draft of the Upper Watershed Blueprint. I'm Brian Calley with Wank Associates. This might be the last time I introduce myself as with Wank Associates. As you guys all know that we've joined Stantec, so we're part of the Stantec team now as well. So anyways, moving forward here. Just to start out, the purpose when we started out with the project was to kind of provide a roadmap for the district, to take a look at the upper watershed and look at projects that can be a benefit for both water quality and flood reduction goals for Spring Lake, Upper Pryor, and Lower Pryor Lake. And the final output was to summarize kind of a potential 10-year plan to implement some improvements to improve that water quality, adding to the carp removals that are being done and the vegetation management that Steve so eloquently presented here. I appreciate some of that. And so that was the ultimate goal, was to come up with a 10-year plan to say, okay, these are some things that can be done over the next 10-year period that can really see an impact, a positive benefit on the water quality and flood reduction. And so our first step was taking all the data that Jamie and the district and the staff provided, evaluating over 10 years of stream, lake, and chemical monitoring data, lake flow, stream flow measurements, elevations and depths, taking that information and putting it into the district PC swim model and calibrating that and adjusting it so that our model outputs were closely matching what was measured to see that we have a model that's as close as possible to actual conditions. And then combining all of that data, the flow data, chemical data, and everything else into a large summary to calculate what are our total loads being contributed from different areas of this watershed and how much total volume of stormwater runoff is being generated as well. And then from there, after we were able to summarize the chemical loading, the nutrient loading, I should say, and the volumes, we looked at project targeting. And the project targeting was to identify a potential location for projects. And to do that, we took a look at the existing settings. If we have favorable topography in the ditches, for example, if there's on the Sutton Lake outlet, there's a significant change in elevation, so that's a favorable location to have some active gravity-fed type of treatment system to try to treat some of that phosphorus reduction. Also looking at areas from all the data analysis that has higher chemical, higher nutrient loading, and higher volumes being generated from that area, because those you could kind of target and have potential for more benefits than areas where you have a very small load or for small volume coming in. And then also taking a look at some of the natural areas in the upper watershed, some of the wetlands, some of the lakes, and see if there's any opportunities in those areas. So from there, we looked at the entire upper watershed and we kind of mapped out. We have several you can see on this map, different locations, kind of concepts and plans and ideas that were kind of bounced around over the last several months. And after we pulled all the different projects together, we went through a screening process. We screened the different projects that we looked at based on potential for annual reduction in phosphorus loading, potential for flood reduction on Prior Lake, a total cost and benefit analysis in terms of cost per pound of phosphorus reduction and total construction cost, or total life cycle cost over a 15-year period. And then significant challenges you might run into in trying to implement these, such as having to deal with multiple landowners and like maybe dealing with easements and challenges in permitting and those sort of challenges. So all these 5 categories were kind of loaded into a calculation for kind of scoring all these different options that we looked at. And from there, like I said, we took all these different categories and we put them into a screening tool where we scored each project between 0 and 50 for each of the different categories that we had pulled together. Like for example, on the phosphorus reduction, our County Ditch 13 system has the highest potential for phosphorus reduction at 1,062 pounds annually. And we use that to create a ratio to figure out what are the points we're going to assign to the other alternatives in terms of the same category that we're looking at. And so in summary, kind of what we came out of with it is these are the 6 projects that we kind of summarized. That this is an example of a summary. We have 3 different that are included in the report. They range in annual phosphorus reduction between about 2,100 pounds to 2,900 pounds annually, with costs between 7 and 9.5 million. And so this is, like I said, this is one of the examples from the report, and there are two others that are also in the summary section. And then we also put together kind of a example of kind of what an implementation schedule could look like. As you can see in this schedule, the first couple of years, currently you're working on the Buck Lake East Wetland Enhancement Project, which is something that you've got some grant funding for. The Spring West Iron Enhanced Sand Filter and going through feasibility studies, so those are shown to be starting up early here. And then this spreads out the potential implementation schedule for these 6 different nutrient reduction projects over the next 10 years. And then to summarize the flood reduction projects we looked at, one of the challenges is it would be really nice to be able to see a project where you can get the flood reduction and the phosphorus reduction at the same time. And I know that was one of the biggest challenges we faced here. And it kind of comes down to reduce flooding in the upper watershed, you really need a very huge land area, several hundred acres, compared to the efficient phosphorus reduction, nutrient reduction projects. You don't need such extensive land use, and so there's many more opportunities, and for the most part, those aren't going to provide any opportunity for reducing your flooding on Prior Lake and Spring Lake and in the streams here. So 3 projects that we did include in the report that do provide some flooding improvements on Prior Lake include the Buck Lake East Wetland Enhancement, which, like I mentioned before, is also one of the phosphorus reducing projects, and it's currently being looked at and analyzed here in the feasibility study. Adding controlled outlet storage on some of the lakes in the upper watershed, including Sutton and Swamp, Fish Lake and Buck Lake, either combined or separately, and those can provide up to about 1/2 foot of flood reduction in Prior Lake. And then also looking at modifications for the Prior Lake outlet channel, which that's, I know it's been looked at many times, many different ways of looking at it, but that's one that definitely has other possibilities, and looking at different scenarios with predictive modeling and things like that, you might be able to even see some benefit even greater than that 1/2 foot in a 10-year, 30-day high water level flood. And then going to the flood reduction projects, a typical implementation schedule. These would probably take much more significant time with the permitting and stakeholder work because there are more impacted landowners. And so the schedule we're showing here is really spreading that out over a longer period of time. And again, it's shown an example if you were to do it, the outlet controlled, the storage in the upper watershed lakes, and starting here and spending about 5 to 6 years with all the permitting and all the planning and negotiating and discussing with stakeholders, and then kind of one project at a time and kind of stagger those and for all 4 of them. And then same thing with the Prior Lake outlet channel modifications. There's several years of stakeholder work and dealing with landowners and that sort of thing to try to implement those solutions. And so thank you for your time, and any questions?
Great, thanks, Brian. Kurt?
Brian, first of all, thank you. It's been good to meet you. You're very competent, and please give our very best to Todd Hubmer. Also, I assume he was given adequate time after the absorption by Stantec to still give his input on this, right?
Yep.
In December. And
January.
Is this the end of Wink then? Is it gonna go away, the name?
As of, I think yesterday, the Wink entity has been dissolved. We're still going to go with the combination of Wink and Stantec.
Okay.
But eventually, sometime later this year, will be only Stantec.
Okay, that sounds funny. And I note on page Roman numeral 4, this kind of tells a story which was disappointing, but It was discovered during the process that the projects that were most beneficial for water quality provide little or no flood mitigation, and projects that are the most beneficial for flood reduction offer little in terms of water quality benefit. I mean, that was the biggest disappointment of ours, because now we can't get a 2-for-1, you know.
Yes,
They're
exactly.
basically isolated projects is going to amount to a lot
Yep.
more money, but, I mean, thank you. It's needed to be done. I also want to point out, Mr. President, that this Buck Lake chemical treatment system, I think you mentioned in the report, Brian, there was a study back in, I think, 2014, Bar Engineering did, and they came up with pretty much the same numbers you did,
Yes.
2.4 million, with a lift station outside of Jehovah's Witness Kingdom Hall, going across into Ducks Unlimited. Now, did you guys do any sampling in Ducks Unlimited? The word has been is Ducks Unlimited has done so much filtering over many decades that it's basically engorged. Was that true or not? Did you do any looking at that?
We didn't look in close depth at that on the how much potential the Ducks Unlimited wetland still has for reduction potential. And so, no, we didn't really look closely. We did look at options and things that could be done in the Ducks Unlimited wetland, and it's challenging from an elevation standpoint of kind of where it sits in relation to Spring Lake, and just we just didn't really come up with any really viable solutions there.
Just to add one more quick thing, and at that time, we looked at putting a treatment plant right on the north side of the Ducks Unlimited wetland. There's some, good land between there and the lakeshore of Spring Lake, and we got shot down because I think it was the DNR said you can't have a treatment plant that close to the body of water. Is that true? Could we have any avenue of maybe trying that again?
That I couldn't be 100% sure on that. The way we have it laid out, very similar to what Bar Engineering had laid out in their 2014 study, is it is upstream of 282, is that the highway number? And it's right on the upstream side of that. 13. Or 13, yes. And that's, to me, that's a very positive layout, because you're not increasing your nutrient loading very much more downstream of that, as it's right after that it's hitting the Ducks Unlimited wetland. And then you have the same dilemma that you had when you had to redo the existing ferrochloride system, in that because of the permitting requirements, and you had to make sure that you can't inject it into the water of the state, so you have to have the bypasses and everything.
That was one of the reasons, was they didn't want the plant close to the lake because they're afraid if there was any spillage or something would happen, it would immediately go into the lake.
Yep.
With no way of really stopping it. Because
And it would be
only a
immediately
few feet from the
susceptible to high
shoreline.
water levels on
Thanks, Brian.
Spring Lake as well.
Thank you. Steve?
Yeah, Brian, in your report, it was indicated that the agricultural growers do not do a lot of irrigation. If the weather patterns were to change to a drier cycle, would there be any areas in the upper watershed for water storage for farmer irrigation?
There really are not a lot of storage locations right now for irrigation use, unless they're drawing right from the ditches or having a offline pond that could be constructed off the ditch to use to pump your water out of for field irrigation. But because of the fact that the farmers weren't really using irrigation, that's the solution that we didn't really take a close look at.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Brian. I know you put a ton of time into this project, and I think, as I understand, or I've sort of heard through the grapevine, maybe more than you guys had anticipated, but I think it's a great project.
Thanks,
and,
Bruce.
even though we didn't get what we were looking for, hopeful, the twofers, I guess, as Kurt referred to them, but we did this to go find out what could be done in the upper watershed. So, I mean, I think you've done that, and you've laid this out pretty well for us. So I know it's gone through some issues, so I thank you for that. I only had one question, actually, in reviewing the plan. I was trying to reconcile some of the numbers from your top 4 projects in the annual phosphorus reduction on table ES01 versus the numbers I was seeing in the table EO.2. And so can you just help me reconcile? I mean, I know Sutton Lake was correct or equal.
Yes, and that is, a few of the numbers, I'm not sure how they got switched around, but the option 11, 12, 13, and 14 got
Yes,
switched around. And I did type in right in here, as I was sitting here listening to Steve's presentation, where those numbers are supposed to go. So the correct numbers are there, but they're on the wrong line.
So let me then ask, for example, so let's just look at number 11. So the ferric chloride on the top 4 projects, our ferric chloride system improvements alternate number 2
Yep,
shows the annual phosphorus reduction individually. And I remember Bruce brought that up. He's not here, but I give him kudos for broaching that as 1,062.
yep,
And then in the annual, a reduction in series is 676.
yes.
Yet if I look on the table ES02, you've got the ferric chloride system improvements alternate number 2 at 911.
And that's correct.
That's the correct one? So are you saying
Yes.
in the top, the listing of the top 4, those will get adjusted?
The top 4 are still the top 4, but the numbers will get switched.
I'm sorry, yeah, I meant
Yes.
the numbers, my apology, I
Yes.
didn't ask that.
Yes.
So then, so the 911, then that what we're receiving there, will that be the annual individually or in series?
Yes, individually. And then in
Gotcha.
series
That's
will be,
what that is.
and then in series will be 417.
Right, and then that'll be reduced further from that?
Yes.
Do you know, does the cost per pound of phosphorus change?
I did double check those, and those are correct.
They're correct, so it's
Yes.
just,
Yes, it's
Okay.
just those
The
2
math.
columns with the
All right,
annual
awesome.
reductions.
thanks, appreciate it. I didn't have anything further, anybody else? Okay, I think we are gonna vote to approve or accept this report, is that correct then? Maggie, Joni, yes, shaking heads. Is there a motion to accept our report?
Motion to approve and accept the Upper Watershed Blueprint as written.
We have a second?
Second?
We have motion and a second on the floor. I assume there's no conversation. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Thank you, gents.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Are you gonna go have a beer after this now? And
One less headache on your list.
all right, we're on to manager presentations and liaison updates. Anybody have something? I do have one myself. Kurt?
Yeah, we had a tour of Sutton Lake on Tuesday, or I mean last week. Last week, I think it was it Tuesday or Wednesday, whatever day it was, and we had about 15 people. Pretty good turnout, all things considered, and especially the Spring Lake Association, I believe, had 4 members there, and they asked a number of good questions. It was very satisfying to see us come near the end of this thing after 2.5 years of, as landowner Chad Sandy said, was definitely tried his patience at time. It's going to be a real asset in the years going forward, being able to control some of this water blasting out of Sutton Lake, both in terms of velocity and in terms of erosion along the Ditch 13 banks. So that was good, and we appreciate again, Chad, your cooperation on this. That's it.
Thank you. Steve, I see you have yours lit. Go for it. You got the floor, sir.
Yes, I went to the Lower Minnesota River Watershed District on February 16th, and they were impressed by our Sutton Lake project area, and they asked if they could share the flyer and the information with other watershed districts, and I told them that would probably be okay. And also, we are looking for Citizens Advisory Committee members. The meetings are the last Thursday of the month at 6:30 at City Hall. And this is a citizen committee that some of the things they do are assist the development of policies and support the mission and strategic priorities of the district, consider the issues relevant and functions and purposes of the district, And so the meetings go about from 6:30 to 8 o'clock. And if you'd like to apply, call the Watershed District 952-447-4166. We're looking for new members that live in the Watershed District.
Great. Thank you, Steve. Frank, anything?
Nothing, thank you.
Okay, then I'm gonna, Maggie, could you come in here? So my one thing isn't necessarily on this topic, but I decided this is the place for it. So Maggie was kind enough to step up and be our interim DA for the last couple of months. And to say the least, we had some significant challenges. We had some staffing issues. We were transitioning accounting firms, banking, and so Maggie, thank you for stepping up. We know you took on some pretty serious crosses that you were bearing during this time, so I just wanted to publicly thank you, recognize what you did. We greatly appreciate it, and thank you for getting us through this.
Thank you, guys.
You're welcome. Okay, next item on our agenda is the consent agenda, and this is typically the one that is the easy stuff that we approve en masse unless somebody pulls something off. I'm giving Kurt the evil eye, I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
I'm looking to see if there's anything anybody wants pulled off the consent agenda. Kurt?
Mr. President,
What do you,
the claims list, I'd like the item mod membership for $7,500 temporarily pulled off pending the administrator's analysis of some more information for next month.
Very good. Anybody else? Seeing none, then I would entertain a motion to approve the amended consent agenda.
Motion to approve?
Second.
We have a motion and a second on the floor. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. That motion carries. Thank you, everybody. So the next item is our treasurer's report, and our treasurer is getting some much-needed vitamin D down south, so he sent in the B team. So I did have a conversation with him. I looked at some of our financial stuff, and I'll give you a brief update as to what Bruce and I had sort of looked at, I think, from the salient points. So the first thing on the treasurer's report, this is the one that he works with Laura and our new accountant at CLA. It's pretty clear that we're in a good cash position. I mean, here's the essence of this. We're in a good cash position. We can handle our cash flow through the year. At this juncture, it looks like we have more money sitting in cash than we typically do, maybe in some securities that it's providing, while they're very small nominal returns, they do provide us something. So that's currently something that we need to work on, is to go put some of that money to work to at least get some interest on that. But we haven't completed a new cash flow. So we don't know how much we can put away for how long, but we will go look to do that. I think the only other thing that I noted on here is just, of course, the Sutton Lake project came both in the current financial report and the big grant that we do have, but that project is really pushed off from last year to this year, so that's what those changes are for. We are, as you can see, we're reserving for the alum treatment that we know that we're inevitably going to be doing. So there's currently some money set aside for that alum treatment, a pretty significant chunk, although these are expensive activities. So were there any, that was it. That's about all I had coming from me or for Bruce. Anybody have any questions on the treasurer's report? Seeing none, and let me see if there was anything. No, I think the only other thing was just also on the, again, the financial report, or sorry, that we have on a current budget where we are today, the actual results. Again, we're transitioning. I still think some things, as I understand, might not quite be settled, so these maybe aren't as clear as they typically are during at this time, but I believe by next month, as I understand it, we'll be in pretty good order with these to get again, a good and true picture of what's happening. So we'll get our monthly cash flow statements back too. So that's it. So with that, then all we have is the last item on the agenda is the upcoming meetings and the event schedule, and I'll just go ahead and read those. We have a CAC meeting Thursday, March 25th at 6:30. It will be a virtual meeting. And we have a farmer-led council meeting Monday, March 29th at 12 p.m. at Spring Lake Town Hall. So seeing that nothing else,
Mr. Chair, just
Go,
quick
Maggie.
point of note, the farmer-led council meeting date is tentative now, so,
tentative.
but it'll be that week likely.
Okay, great. Thanks, Maggie.
Maggie, is that a virtual meeting?
Mr. Chair, Manager Pani, nope, it's going to be in person.
quality.
Spring Lake Town Hall is open for rental again, so we can have up to 30 people there.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Seeing nothing else, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second on the floor. Any debate on that? Seeing none. All those in favor say aye.
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 That motion carries. Thank you, everybody, and good night.
Do you have any 7 o'clock times Wednesdays in the month?